The plane was landing 16 minutes late, which was a problem. When a plane lands less than 10 minutes late, people are pretty optimistic about the whole thing because chances are good you'll make your connection. And when a plane lands more than 30 minutes late, you just know you're going to have to revise your whole agenda. It's that in-between time, that 11 to 29 minutes, when people get really panicked. Humans trapped in a metal cylinder who are 16 minutes late do some crazy things. The 5'2" woman sitting in row 19, but her luggage is overhead row 35, will actually pole vault her way to the back of the plane. And the self-proclaimed most important person on the plane will use professional wrestling moves to bully his way forward. You hate those people, right? 4 years ago, I was one of them. Now, I'm a rule follower, so I waited until the flight attendant said it was safe to use your electronic devices before I powered up my phone. That's when I saw the voicemail icon. So as I gathered my things, I dialed in, listened, and then broke down into loud, gasping sobs, paralyzed in the center aisle and blocking the flow of passengers who were 16 minutes late. On my phone was the voice of a man I'd never met. I didn't even know existed, telling me he was my brother, and he'd been looking for me for a very long time. 5 hours earlier, I was sitting at a computer terminal in the Family History Library in downtown Salt Lake City. We were returning from vacation, but didn't need to be to the airport for several hours, so on a lark, I went in. I was adopted when I was 4 years old. No one had to tell me that. I always knew. It was part of me, like my pigtails and my freckles and my memories of the orphanage. And I'd never really had an interest in finding my birth family. Sometimes one family's enough, if you know what I mean. But as you age, you start to think about your medical history. So with nothing more than my birth parents' names, I checked in at the front desk and purchased a small flash drive. The computer was being uncooperative when a very helpful Mormon lady, about 87 and a half years old, came and sat beside me and offered to help. Well, I told her I was adopted and looking for my ancestry and not really sure, and in there somewhere I mentioned my birth parents' names. And then I completely ignored her as I searched around for the USB port. The next thing I know, my entire birth family is splashed across the computer screen. "What is this?" I asked. And then I looked at her and she was beaming and saying, "I know, isn't it wonderful?" Well, I've never looked up anything on Ancestry.com before, but I was sort of put off by that mesh of branches and those tiny leaves popping up. My first reaction was disbelief. Side note here, orphans have trust issues. So as I explained, I'm not really certain about these dates. She brought up birth certificates. And then as I questioned, how did this information get here in the first place? She brought up census records. And then as I tried to turn the conversation toward a "we'll see," she clicked on one of those leaves and I gave up because I was looking at a picture of myself. Only it couldn't be me because the photo's so old, from the 1950s. But there was a woman who looked exactly like me, sitting on the floor in front of a man in a yellow print chair. He's smoking a cigarette, and she's holding a little girl. And the most shocking part of all of that is that I have never looked like anyone before. Well, as if to erase any doubts, that ancestry tree exploded on the screen. Lines running here and connections linking people there and those pesky leaves popping up everywhere. You know, a moment before, I didn't have a single blood relative. And the next moment, you can't swing a dead cat without hitting one of my 17 aunts or uncles on one side and dozens of cousins. Well, with a woman's help, I traced my ancestry back to William the Conqueror on one side, and Florus Hall, a 12th century wheat farmer, on the other. All I can say is, someone married up. But there was something about that visual on the screen, that web of family, that net of finally knowing. It was both intriguing and a little frightening. So how'd I get here? It started with my mom. She was born in 1929, but because of the Depression and World War II, she didn't marry until 1944. That's when Mom and Dad moved from rural Iowa and settled into a bungalow in a North Des Moines neighborhood. His job was white collar, and her job was learning everything she could about Jell-O molds. Now, to be fair, the plan was to start a family because, well, that was everybody's plan. But by 1950, it was clear that her ovaries weren't having any part of it. So between sewing and baking and ironing white-collared shirts, she began volunteering at the Des Moines Children's Home, an orphanage located about where Gateway Market is today. Now, this was a time when women were defined by motherhood, and it was clear from the questions people asked that they didn't know quite what to do with her. Meanwhile, across town, my birth mom was having babies like a boss. 5 children in 5 years from 2 different husbands, neither of whom stayed around for very long. I guess overactive ovaries are just as inconvenient as inactive ones. Both of these women lived scandalous lives, and both of them felt the shame of failing to be who the culture said they should be. Their lives converged when Mom and Dad decided to adopt, and my birth mom realized she couldn't raise 5 children on waitress tips. So, Mom got her little girl with pigtails, and my birth mom got her chance to start over in California, where stories always end happily. And you know, the pictures on that computer screen showed a happy life with a whole new family. Meanwhile, back in Des Moines, Mom and I did okay too, even though her Norwegian mother-in-law, my grandmother, frowned on the whole idea right from the start. She'd say things like, "It's not natural," and "No one likes leftovers." I'm grateful for the courage it took both my moms to create a home. Nothing about either of their stories is easy, and neither of them need my permission or approval. And yet, I do believe they both did the best they could from a place of deep love. There's just one thing, though. That whole not looking like anyone business, that's an interesting window from which to view the world. And that's just what I did. On trips to downtown Des Moines, I'd sit in the back seat and look out the car window at the women shopping and wonder, is it her or her? You know, after much study, given the size of my head and general shape of my torso, I decided as a teenager, I must be descended from Albanian peasant stock. Now, meaning no offense to Albanian women, let me just say, I'd hoped for a chance at something different. And I got that chance in Salt Lake City, because after Salt Lake City, I went on a quest to learn more about who I am. So I met one-on-one with 3 of my 7 brothers. And yes, one of them was the voice on the phone back in the plane. Next, I learned I'm not Norwegian. I'm not even Albanian. I'm Dutch. And I mean, I am seriously Dutch. So I went to the Netherlands to learn what that's all about. And I brought home some gifts. Now, the first gift for me was the gift of proper accessories. As it turns out, Albanian women and Dutch women, not all that different. All I needed to do was swap out that ugly brown headscarf tied so tightly at the back of my neck for one of those starched white Dutch caps with a flip on the end. I tell you, the cuteness factor increased by a power of 10. Michael Kors is correct. Accessories are the exclamation point. The second gift was the gift of cuisine. Now, I was raised by Norwegians, so you can't blame me. I didn't know any better. But the Norwegian language doesn't really have a word for cuisine. The closest to it is the word kumla, which translates loosely as potato and flour boiled in fat. Oddly, I'm okay with that. But in Holland, I got Dutch letters and cheese, so much cheese. And the third gift was the gift of stories. Stories like how my Dutch grandmother learned to play piano by ear, just like me. Take that, Mrs. Case. And how a grandfather who only spoke Dutch went to the Polk County Courthouse in a failed attempt to gain custody of 5 orphaned grandchildren he would never see grow up. Stories of how my birth family is overrun with ministers and musicians and writers, people sort of like me. I received my final gift in the port town of Willemstad near the North Sea. There was an organ recital being held in the oldest Protestant church in all of Europe. Okay, that's basically candy to a minister. So yeah, I went, yeah. But I remember the pews were small and narrow and hard, and the organ music just swallowed you up in this place of reformation. But what caught me was the ivy growing up the church walls. Vines running here and there, and leaves popping up surprisingly from dark iron relief. Yeah, it was eerily similar to that visual on the screen back in Salt Lake City. Could it be that we all get something like that? A safety net of sorts that connects our past to our present and creates a home? Now, I know some of you think you figured out the scandal in my story. But the scandal isn't about anything that 2 moms did or didn't do. The real scandal is that in those moments when you feel absolutely alone and you're paralyzed and sobbing because the flow of your life is being blocked somehow and everyone around you is acting crazy, the real scandal is that in those moments, someone is looking for you. The real scandal is that crazy net ready to catch you. The real scandal is the home waiting to be found. Any of you feeling a little abandoned lately? Tossed aside? Like leftovers? Maybe you decided not to have children or to have too many, even if it was just the one. Or maybe you became a stay-at-home dad or took a non-traditional career path or let someone go along the way. Whatever your choice is, just know that in those moments, the mystery of the universe is ready to catch you in its net, keep you safe, and bring you home. Maybe if you knew that, you'd stop carrying around the ugly, dark things that tie you up in knots. And you'd start to accessorize your life with a little joy. Maybe you'd treat yourself once in a while. Stop settling for boiled potatoes when there's pastry on the menu. Maybe you'd discover the stories of your own life and write your own if you had to. Thank you.